Why do you say that, Father? You aren't afraid, are you?
No, but I respect some of the superstitions of others. Often they are founded in fact.
Sanctum Sanctorum in Venice, California. I'm Krista, and we are the Sixth Sense Society. Welcome again to another episode of the Sixth Sense Society. Tonight, we are thrilled to welcome back my father, Dr. George Schwimmer, who's been a metaphysician for over 40 years, an author of over 20 books, and a with us about the legendary lost continent of Mu. So stay tuned. Michael is going to, however, give us some announcements of the shows coming up.
Hi guys, sorry that we're starting a few minutes late tonight, but we had a couple little technical issues, but we're up and running now, so I'm glad you guys were patient. We have some really great stuff coming up, and next week we have our good friend Humberto Braga here. Sorry about that, Humberto. And he's going to be talking about how to raise your consciousness, and I think that's going to be an amazing show. The following week, my good friend therapist Merle Yost will be here, and he's going to be going through a lot of his healing stuff and modalities and some of the workshops he does and talking about it, which is going to be fascinating as well. And then in October, it's all things paranormal. If you love ghost hunters, you're going to love October. It's just ghosts, and more ghosts. So we're going to have all kinds of cool people. Our friend Jeff Mandel is going to be here, and he's a tech guy, so he's going to be talking about some of the tech stuff, what works, what doesn't work. We've got a ghost photographer that photographs haunted places, and all kinds of cool stuff coming up. So check our website. Pay attention to that, and you can find out all about the shows. Just a reminder again, in October, we're also going to be switching to a new time slot, which will be Tuesdays. We're looking either 12 or 1 o'clock Pacific at lunchtime somewhere. So we'll let you guys know probably next week for sure what time it's going to be. So keep an eye out for that as well. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Krista, and we're really looking forward to the topic tonight. I think it's going to be a ton of fun.
Great. Thanks, Michael. So welcome, Dad.
Hi.
So what would you like to start with? Would you like to maybe tell people exactly what this civilization was and when it was?
Okay, I'd like to start off, first of all, with what constitutes proof. In criminal law, proof is proving a case beyond a reasonable doubt. In civil courts, however, proof of a case is by preponderance of the evidence, and that's what I'm going to be presenting tonight. However, preponderance means 51% or more. But the fact that I'm going to be giving tonight constitute a heck of a lot more than 51%. And I don't know of any place else that has this collection of facts, partly because a lot of the facts just sort of came to me, which is a strange phenomenon that's happened to me for years now. In many murder cases, no body is found, but the defendants are found guilty by circumstantial evidence.
That's a good point.
The same applies to the destruction of the continent of Mu. I can't present the continent, but a great deal of circumstantial evidence exists, more than enough to prove my case. Now, one of the things with geologists, a lot of people have a lot of doubts about so-called science. And one of the people who did the most research, which I'll get to in a moment, Colonel James Churchward, he had a very dim view of geologists, and I can understand why. Most of them are academics, and they're afraid of their reputation, so they don't stick their necks out. So, I don't know a single study done by a single geologist that looked into the possible existence of Mu. I didn't run across a single one.
Wow.
Now, my search for Mu came about from personal events by chance, supposedly. In July of 2005, I began studying Peruvian Q'ero shamanism as taught by Dr. Alberto Villoldo. And over 20 months, I took 5 week-long workshops, which included receiving the sacred Munaiki rites, which were bestowed on me by the Q'ero shamans who'd come from Peru. And although the Q'ero, which is usually spelled in the Spanish manner, capital Q apostrophe E-R-O, the Q'ero are said to be direct descendants of the Inca, but the shamans told us that they actually are the descendants of the Laika, L-A-I-K-A, which means the wisdom keepers, who had lived in Peru long before the Inca. And the word Q'ero, also spelled K-E-R-O, I discovered is actually the name for a ceremonial cup made of different kinds of materials, and the word means container. So the Q'ero are the containers of wisdom, they told us.
That's cool.
Yeah. And Alberto said the Munaiki rites date back 100,000 years. And that really got my attention and the curiosity. And for the next couple of years, I kept wondering where the rites might have come from. I mean, 100,000 years, cavemen were supposed to be around at 50,000 years. So where was this coming from? And at this time, I was living in Los Angeles and had previously lived for 2 years in Santa Barbara, which will become relevant later. And in October of 2007, I decided to move to Santa Fe, New Mexico. And I had no good reason for doing this. And I still don't know why I'm here. But I came here. Well, that's the way my life has been for the last 40 years. So anyway, I was still wondering about the origins of the Q'ero rites, and I finally began looking on the internet for books about the legendary lost continent of Mu or Lemuria. I'd run across the name when reading about Edward Casey and a couple other places, but nobody really ever said anything about Mu. They just said, oh, well, it supposedly existed, and that was about the end of what they wrote in books. And as you probably know, people tend to use both Mu and Lemuria interchangeably to designate the lost continents. But after this research, I don't use Lemuria anymore. I just use Mu. Now, but curiously, this is really curious. The word lemur, which is an animal, of course, is derived from the ancient Latin word lemurus, L-E-M-U-R-E-S, which means spirits of. And the Romans had a festival for the dead that was called Feast of Lemurus or Lemuria, which is pretty strange.
Yeah.
Well, eventually I found 5 paperbacks about Mu, which had been written by British Colonel James Churchward, and he lived from 1851 to 1936. And he had researched Mu for 50 years after having been in India and met a priest who showed him some ancient tablets, which he was able to decipher with the priest's help. Now, some of Churchward's information was unverifiable since he had promised not to reveal where he'd obtained it, which was from this ancient Indian temple. But there also was enough verifiable material to make a strong circumstantial case that Mu had in fact existed. And so I continued my research, buying other books and doing research online, including doing research on the Edward Casey readings. And he didn't refer to Mu a whole lot, maybe a dozen times. But,
compared to like Atlantis, right?
Yeah, his focus was Atlantis because most of the people who came to him had past lives in Atlantis. I don't recall very many people who, more than a handful, who had past lives that he mentioned that come from Mu. So what I'm going to discuss today are some of the facts I discovered.
Great.
Okay, according to Colonel Churchward and Edgar Casey, Mu was the first great Earth civilization. Churchward said it had a population of 64 million people, situated, of course, in the Pacific Ocean, on a continent which was made up of 3 large land masses, each of which was separated by a channel of water. The continent was at least 5,000 miles by 3,000 miles in size. The civilization, thought to have lasted for at least 100,000 years, was destroyed by the sinking and inundation of the continent in 3 stages: approximately 50,000 BC, 28,000 BC, and finally 11,000 BC. Now, these figures keep coming up over and over again. You'll hear me mention it in different contexts, but those seem to be the 3 times. They were brought down by volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, and the collapse of huge subterranean gas belts under the continent, according to Churchward. Excuse me. Now, there is one piece of literary work, the oldest literary work on the planet, the Rig Veda, tells of an immense continent named Rutas, R-U-T-A-S, far to the east of India and home to people who worship the sun. Keep that in mind.
Okay.
The Rutas was torn apart by volcanic upheaval and dropped to the ocean floor, exactly as Churchward and Casey had said. Fragments of the continent remained as Indonesia and the Pacific Islands, and some survivors reached India, according to the Rig Veda. So there is some written evidence, although this is way after the events.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Indonesia is made up of 17,500 islands, and it has a long history of powerful eruptions and earthquakes. It's ringed by a chain of volcanoes and lies between the world's most active seismic region, the notorious Pacific Ring of Fire, and the world's second most active region, the Alpide Belt.
Hmm.
And in addition, about 90% of all the world's earthquakes and 80% of the world's largest earthquakes strike along the Ring of Fire.
That's amazing.
The ring is home to 452 volcanoes, which is 75% of the world's active and dormant volcanoes. So you can see right away that this area is certainly a prime suspect.
Sure.
For the destruction of Mu. Okay, now Mu's primary orientation was spiritual, not technical like Atlantis. And although Mu was called the Empire of the Sun, and that'll keep coming back also, Churchward emphasized that the people of Mu did not practice sun worship. This is one of the crazy things that anthropologists keep on bringing forward, saying that these people were primitive and they worshiped the sun. They didn't worship the sun. The sun was a symbol which represented the great cosmic sun, which in turn was a symbol for the creator. And Mu was additionally called the lands of the West in South America because the Mu lay west of South America. Edgar Casey, in a 1932 reading, stated that, quote, the Andean or the Pacific coast of South America then occupied extreme eastern portion of Lemuria. So Lemuria actually ended further east than Churchward said, and it extended actually to the west coast of the United States, which I'll mention shortly.
Fascinating.
Now, the settlers from Mu came to the lands of Peru and other parts of South America. They came to the area of Mexico City. They also came to Southern California. Edgar Casey in one reading said one entity who was from Mu established near what is now Santa Barbara the Temple of the Sun and Moon. And you'll hear more about temples of the sun and moon elsewhere. But that's fascinating. You know, I keep wondering is there some way of finding this temple? It would be fantastic.
Oh, that
if we
would be
could.
amazing. Yes.
Now, immigrants from Mu later went to the area of Oregon and to the lands in the current states of New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, Utah, and Colorado. And later on, descendants of the Mu settlers in South America and Mexico also migrated to those 5 areas, while still other migrants came directly from Mu when that civilization was about to be destroyed. And you have to keep this in mind that this was in 3 stages. So they had 2 previous stages, and so they had a good idea if when something was going to happen.
Right.
Churchward and Casey both stated that the Hopi, and I found that the Hopi's full name is Hopi-Tu Shi-Nu Mu.
Oh, I never heard that. Wow.
M-U.
That's amazing.
So both the Hopi and the Navajo and other Native American peoples of the western states were descendants of immigrants from Mu. I read elsewhere that Casey said that the Native Americans on the East Coast all came from Atlantis. Now, here's another interesting thing about that is written. In 1990, a Hopi elder named Oswald White Bear Fredericks, who was then 85, dictated his knowledge of the Hopi Bear Clan's ancient past, in which he stated that his Hopi ancestors originally had come from Mu.
Wow.
He said these ancient people had built Titicaca, a very large city that now is at the bottom of Lake Titicaca, which lies between Peru and Bolivia, and that Tiwanaku had been part of that city on its outskirts. And over long periods of time, White Bear's clan, and others, of course, then migrated northward, and finally the Hopi settled permanently in Arizona, confirming both Casey's and Churchward's assertions. Now, with the final destruction of Mu, some survivors also moved further westward around the globe from Mu to create other empires, accounting for similarities in language, customs, far history, architecture, farming, and so on in those parts of the world. And virtually every society and group around the Pacific Ocean, including Native Americans, has in its oral history an account of the destruction of a great society in a flood, and that its ancestors had come from this continent. I remember reading one time that there are 500 stories of the flood around the world.
Yes, there is a lot.
Now, for many years, there have been, as most people know, inexplicable ruins and statues around the Pacific Islands. And the best known are the large and mysterious Easter Island heads. And nobody's been able to make heads or tails of that. However, in 2012, it was announced that these heads have bodies. In its winter 2012 issue of Venture Inward newsletter, the following was published, quote, "Among the Easter Island State Project team's discoveries was the astonishing fact that the dirt and debris partially burying the statues was washed down from above and was not deliberately placed there to bury, protect, or to support the figures." Now, these figures are huge.
Yes.
And this type of debris that they're covered with is common to flood zones, mainly sand and pebbles, the kind of pebbles and grayish clay that's found after a tsunami. Remember tsunami, because we're going to keep coming back to that over and over again. So it's obvious that the statues were partially covered over by gigantic tsunamis during the final inundation of Mu. Mm-hmm. From the photographs, which you can see online now, it appears that dozens of feet of earth, it looks like at least 24 feet, maybe more, and debris covers the bottom of these huge statues and the whole island. Now get this, there are 887 statues on the island.
That's amazing.
397 partially completed statues are in the main quarry. And here's what somebody has written. It appears that statue creation was in full swing when they rather quickly stopped making statues. End of quote. Now tell me, who in their right mind just stops making 397 huge statues?
No one.
I mean, it doesn't happen.
Right.
So obviously, the artisans were swept away
right.
by the tsunami that also deposited the debris around the standing heads. Thor Heyerdahl found that the Charapa people of Chachapoya in Peru made carvings extremely similar to the Easter Island statues. And Easter Island is some distance from Peru, but it's almost directly, Peru is almost directly east of Easter Island. Now, there has not been a tremendous amount of, I did research, and there's not been done a tremendous amount of research about these strange things that people found on different islands. Mm-hmm. But the kind of thing that they found, for instance, were roads which are made of closely fitted stone that is so carefully cut that you can't even put a straw or a hair between them. So there's one where the road runs right off down into the ocean. Mm-hmm. There are other places where they found steps leading into the ocean. But the whole idea, just take Easter Island, the stone that those heads are made out of does not exist on Easter Island. So where did they come from, and why did these people, make these heads? I mean, it's a small island.
It is pretty strange.
To make 800 heads like that,
yeah,
actually statues, is crazy. Now, another interesting thing Schwimmer wrote about was that all 5 races existed in Mu, which appears to have been validated by a man named Jakob Roggeveen, who visited Easter Island in 722 and found 3 distinct groups of people, dark-skinned, red-skinned, and very pale-skinned people with red hair. Now, Easter Island is only 15.3 miles long and 76 miles wide. Now, where in heaven's name did these 3 different people come from? They had to have come from Mu.
Right.
One Polynesian name of Easter Island is, I'm sure I'll pronounce this incorrectly, Tapito o Henua, which translated into English is thought to mean navel of the world. Today, Cusco, Peru is called navel of the world. And as I said, Easter Island is almost directly west of Cusco.
Yeah, and Peru is definitely becoming very popular in the New Age movement as a central place to go and visit, and for people are feeling the kind of connection to Peru a lot more strongly.
I'll get to that, I hope, at the end of this presentation. Now, let me see. Oh, yeah, this is very interesting. You may be familiar, living in Los Angeles, with the Chumash Indians of California. The Chumash claim that their ancestors arrived in California after a great flood. The Chumash are believed to have settled in California. Now, this is by anthropologists. Said to have are believed to have settled in California, including Santa Barbara and Los Angeles 13,000 years ago. Well, that's the same time that Casey and Schwimmer said that the last inundation of Mu occurred. When they're asked about their origins, the Chumash point westward toward the Pacific Ocean as the home of the first people. the Chumash also honor a place of the West they call the Land of the Dead. Now, in a similar vein, both Hawaiians and the Maori of New Zealand say their far ancestors were people of Mu. So here we've got 3 people already, and the 4 people already that say they came from Mu: the Maori, the Hawaiians, the Chumash, and the Hopi.
That's amazing.
Yeah. In Inca lore, a man named Manco Capac and his wife Mama Aklo, who called themselves Children of the Sun. That was a name for the people of Mu. They all called themselves Children of the Sun. So these 2 people were calling themselves Children of the Sun. They are said to have landed after a great deluge at the islands of Lake Titicaca, and there set up a civilization. The Inca claimed direct descent from those 2, also calling themselves Children of the Sun. It's not true, and I'll get to that in a minute, but that's what they call themselves. Now, in articles in the New York Times in 1966, Dr. Robert J. Menzies, director of Duke University's oceanographic program, was working on his research ship off the coast of Peru when his deep-sea cameras photographed 4 carved rock columns 6,000 feet under water. And the columns were covered with what appeared to be some sort of writing. So that's another bit of archaeology. Let me go on to something else here.
I just wanted to add here about the archaeology that it's becoming more and more evident that there are real sunken cities. And I found 2 really interesting ones, because one is off India's coast, and it was evidently in the mythical kingdom from the Mahabharata. And supposedly Lord Krishna, after a battle, decided to leave the city of Dwarka, and then it went under water, and it turned out to be an actual real city, which they discovered in 1963. And so they're taking it more seriously, some of the mythology, to find the truth in it, the kernels of truth, and not just saying, oh, it's just some sort of made up thing and symbolizes something.
There apparently is a city off the coast of Japan also. They haven't really investigated extensively, but and they found some structures that seem to be man-made. So you have to consider, I read somewhere that the oceans are about 300 feet higher now than they were a long time ago.
Right.
So, we don't know how many cities. I mean, Troy was supposedly a myth, and then it turned out to be a real city.
Oh, that's right.
So there's a lot of cities that are missing.
Yes.
Let me see what I want to get to here next. Okay. In the pre-Incan city of Chan Chan, which means sun, there is a wall painting that shows a sunken pyramid city with fish swimming above it. The name of the people who created Chan Chan is Chimu. The founder of Chan Chan, Tai Ka Na Mu, is said to have been given a royal commission from the great lord from across the sea to create a city, which he did, which was Chan Chan. And Tiwanaku in Bolivia, near the border of Peru, is estimated to be 17,000 years old. It was a major ceremonial center and focal point of a culture that spread across much of the region. One writer has noted the most tantalizing fact is that the Tiwanaku culture has no roots in that area. It did not grow there from humbler beginnings, nor is any other place of origin known. The culture seems to have appeared practically full-blown suddenly. And then the site was mysteriously abandoned by its people. And this is one of the favorite phrases of archaeologists about Tiwanaku, about all of the ruins up and down South America. about some ruins in Mexico, which I'll get to momentarily. They keep on saying, "Oh, the people just disappeared mysteriously." And before I did the research, I'd say, "Well, maybe ETs picked them all up and carried them away." But
Well,
it's
ancient
very
aliens would
obvious.
say that.
Yeah. Now this is really interesting. Two of Tiwanaku's remaining features are a stone pyramid and a large carved stone gateway called Gateway of the Sun. And you can get that get up on the internet and bring that up. In the center of which is the image of a so-called sun god, which has rays shooting from its face in all directions. On either side of it are tiers of winged figures that have either human or condor heads, which are kneeling toward the sun god as if vowing allegiance, and each figure wears a crown and holds a scepter before him. Now, the sun god is sometimes called the weeping god because there are 3 tears carved on each cheek. Now, the strange thing about this gate is that the carvings are unfinished, leaving observers to wonder what could have so abruptly interrupted work on the gate. How did this huge, solid piece of ancient stone get broken in half? And why was it found lying askew deep in silt until it was restored? Mm-hmm. And again, just as on Easter Island, here are a bunch of artisans who are carving something massive, and all of a sudden, boom, they're stopped halfway through, and nobody knows why.
What do the 3 tiers represent?
I'm glad you asked that. You're a good wingman. Okay. The number 3 represents Mu. That is its representation. Anytime you find anything in archaeology vaguely related to the Pacific with 3 somehow included in there, that refers to Mu because Mu had 3 land masses. So the 3 tiers on the face of the sun god represents the fact that it was Mu and that Mu is now dead and the sun god is crying. And
so
of course,
did they have a sense that they were going to come to a final end then, do you think? The civilization?
No, they did not. Every single example I ran across, people had no idea it was going to happen. And Casey even mentions one person in a reading who had decided to go up on a mountain and do some studying, and he was sitting on this mountain when the whole civilization got wiped out, and he was virtually the only person left there.
Oh, that's so horrible.
Yeah. Well, where this particular gateway, which I mentioned, is located, there virtually is never any rain. And one person who had investigated this for years said that a stupendous wave must have come across the entire region and wiped out the entire civilization. So I want to get to, 1 second here. I want to get to, here we are, Mexico. Now, I had no idea of investigating Mexico. I didn't, what has that got to do with Mu? I want to mention one other thing. Peru's Machu Picchu has a gateway of the sun, and down the Inca Road from Machu Picchu on the mountain of Huayna Picchu is the Temple of the Moon. So there we go again, the Temple of the Sun, Temple of the Moon.
Yeah.
So I hadn't paid very much attention to Mexico until there was something peculiar about it. And what it turned out was it was written up in one of Churchward's books. Now, the valley is believed to have been inhabited for at least 12,000 years. There we go back to 12,000 again. Mm-hmm. Now, at the present time, the location in Mexico City is at the 7,350-foot elevation. And there's something peculiar about that. for there is geological evidence that Mexico City suffered 3 great inundations in its far past. So how could that happen? What if it's 7,300 feet up there?
Right.
Well, the fact is, I'm going to skip over this and just summarize it a bit. There was a man named William Niven, and he was an archaeologist, and he was digging stuff up in the early 1900s, and he discovered all kinds of things, including 2,600 andestine tablets of great antiquity, and he eventually sent rubbings of these to James Churchward, who believed that the symbols and markings on the tablets had roots in the ancient culture of Mu. However, even more fascinating, and I don't know why this guy kept on digging, but he just kept on digging. And he kept on digging for about 40 feet, and he discovered 3 civilizations, one on top of the other.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. And the top one consisted of 9 feet of boulders, gravel, sand with broken pottery. And then there was a pavement. And then under that pavement was 14 feet of small boulders, gravel, and sand. And underneath that was a layer of volcanic ashes, under which was a buried city, and then there was a third pavement. And so there apparently had been complete destruction of 3 civilizations in this same area.
Did they date it?
The dates are pretty much the same as they were with the dates that Casey and Churchward said. Now, like Lake Titicaca and its surrounding regions, the Mexico City area and its surrounding mountains and volcanoes was later thrust up to its present height, probably at the same time as Lake Titicaca. So all across the just set back from the west coast of South America, Central America, Mexico, and the western part of the United States, these mountains all came up. And geologists will tell you, no, they came up millions of years ago, and Churchward said, no, it didn't. They came up something like 15 or 20,000 years ago. But it all happened at one time. So the same thing happened with Mexico City as happened with Tiwanaku. It had originally been at sea level, and while it was at sea level, it had been inundated 3 times in 3 different periods, and the civilization destroyed 3 times. And then the mountains were thrust up to this height of 7,300 feet at the present time. So again, it's impossible that anything else but a enormous tsunami, which was preceded by volcanoes and earthquakes, could have wiped out 3 civilizations. Catherine Ann Porter, you know her?
Is she a writer?
She was a writer.
Yes.
Yeah, she was a writer. At that time, she was a correspondent writing about the Mexican Revolution for United Press International, and she got to know Niven and observed his excavations, and she wrote, I have dug out with my own hands skeletons and idols and pots and fragments of wall and roof many feet underground, all of them scorched and blackened. Now, another one which really got me was, it is known that in Alaska and in Siberia, there are these huge remnants of elephants and mammoths and bison, all mixed together with trees and they are mixed with piles of bones and trees, also twisted and torn and piled in tangled groups, and the whole is covered with a fine, sifting muck. Now, what do you think caused that?
Tsunami?
Well, your geologists will tell you it was caused by the ice, what are they called?
The glaciers melting, or?
Glaciers, yeah. This is caused by glaciers. I went online yesterday to find out how fast a glacier goes. Guess how fast the average glacier goes?
No idea.
10 inches a day.
Oh, fairly slow.
10 inches a day. Now, you can't tell me that a glacier moving at 10 inches a day is going to sweep up huge piles of bison and trees and mammoths and mush them all together and cover them with this muck. It's impossible. It had to be a tsunami. So this went all the way up to Alaska and then also Siberia. Now, before we run out of time, I want to get to the DNA, because that is also fascinating. I was just going to mention, I can't go into detail, I don't have enough time left, but the language, there is a common root for the languages, which goes from the west coast of South America up to all of the western Native American tribes up into Canada, and it does not come from Siberia, which anthropologists insist that the Native Americans came from. No Native Americans came from Siberia. It's ridiculous, and I will tell you why in one moment. Okay. Studies of mitochondrial DNA also supply compelling evidence of a single Pacific population in the far ancient past. Although there are more than 40 major groupings of mitochondrial DNA, which are called haplogroups, only one of interest here is haplogroup B. Mitochondrial haplogroup B is one of the four major matrilineal Native American lineages in North America on the West Coast. In North America, haplogroup B is almost completely confined to the Southwest.
Interesting.
Where 2 millennia ago, people from Mu had migrated. Haplogroup B came to North America, now get this, in 3 waves. Okay, so now we have another source that says 3 waves.
Yes.
It's fascinating how this keeps coming up, these 3 waves. Haplogroup B is densest along South America's western coast and is found as well in the Peruvian Andes and Bolivia, which makes the distribution of early Quechua speakers in those regions, and both church words and cases contention that people from Mu had lived there. So you have a heavy concentration of Quechua speakers along the west coast of Peru, and then you also have this haplogroup B. B is the only mitochondrial haplogroup found on both sides of the Pacific Ocean: the Americas, the Philippines, Japan, China, Indonesia, Thailand, and Madagascar. It is also found in Mongolians, Tibetans, Koreans, and in populations of Vietnam, Malaysia, Taiwan, Micronesia, Melanesia, and Polynesia. The origin of the people of Melanesia and Polynesia is presently classified as, quote, unknown, as is the origin of haplogroup B. So you've got these haplogroup Bs all around the edge of the Pacific Ocean. Okay. Here's another one with the DNA. A 1991 paper on genetics note, a recent hypothesis proposes that 3 waves of migration populated the Americas.
Wow.
Here we go again.
The 3 waves.
Yep. Two lineages were observed exclusively in Amerindians, American Indians,
Mm-hmm.
and were shared by all such tribal groups analyzed, thus demonstrating, I'm quoting, that North Central and South American Americans originated from a common ancestral genetic stock. Now get this. We hypothesized that all Americans derived from a population which experienced a dramatic reduction of its effective size and genetic variation before or during its migration to the Americas, which means before they came from Mu.
There's definitely a lot of, I guess you would call it, a preponderance of evidence that, like you said in the very beginning, that makes this a very strong case.
Yeah, well, this isn't all that I have. You know, we don't have enough time to give everything there is there. But for example, I've got a whole section, and Churchward wrote an entire book on symbols, and these symbols are all over the place. They're around different parts of the world, and there are some actually in New Mexico, carved on boulders. The what is it called now? This is, one second, I can't think of the word.
While you're doing that, I wanted to kind of plug, you have 3 books, I think, Kindle books about Mu, right? You have Mu, the First Great Civilization, The Healing Secrets of the Shamans of Mu, Emperor of the Sun, and How to Obtain Distant Shamanic Healing. They're all on Kindle, and 2 right now are free if you have Kindle Unlimited membership to download. And they're all very inexpensive, so I did want to share that with people before we even get close to the end of the show.
Right. Another time, if you invite me again, I will talk about my training as a shaman, because the training I received from Dr. Alberto Violdo, who's been doing this now for 30 years, and he trained with the Carol. He actually went down there and trained with them. And he's been doing that for years and years, and he's been teaching for years and years and years.
Mm-hmm.
And so he got this material from the Carol and from some other shamans in the Amazon. So this training goes back to the Carol, who go back to the Laika, who go back to the migrants who came from Mu, and eventually goes to Mu. So I've received training that was given in Mu 15,000 years ago.
And that's fascinating. I definitely want to do another show on that because of the little bit you told me about it. It's very interesting and fascinating. And maybe there's something timely about all of this kind of coming to the surface more. You know, the fact that it's spreading to a Western man so that it can be reached by more people. So I'm wondering if there's some significance to, you know, your interest, and maybe there are more people more interested in Mu and not, you know, the other lost continent, Atlantis, which has always had a lot of popular attention.
Okay, I got a paragraph here that I was going to use at the very end, but since you bring it up, I want to read it. There's one possible clue to the reemergence of Mu in people's consciousness. You know, my ebook on Mu sells better than any of my other books.
Really?
Now, why is that? I mean, who the heck ever heard of Mu?
No one. I never heard of it.
Well, why are these people buying my book? You know, they just show up month after month, and they're buying this. So anyway, there is one possible clue to the reemergence of Mu in people's consciousness. There's a legend that the New Age will start in earnest when the condor of the South flies with the eagle of the North. The condor representing heart energy, the eagle representing intellect. Then I recently learned that the heart chakra of the earth, I didn't even know that the earth had chakras, but the heart chakra of the earth, which had been focused in Tibet for thousands of years, has moved to the sacred mountains of Peru, shifting from Tibet's masculine energies to Peru's feminine energies.
Well, you
And
know,
maybe
the
that,
Tibetan leader, the Karmapa, before the current Karmapa, had a connection to the Hopi tribe. They met,
oh,
and I
there
remember
you
this
go.
story. They met and they honored each other. The Hopi, I don't know the name of the Hopi chief, and they both gave each other the same ring. And so there was this odd connection with the Hopi. I always meant to explore it, but I do remember that story.
Well, two things. Number one, the Tibetans are descendants of the teachers and priests of Mu. They knew that Mu was going to be destroyed, and they one group went to Tibet, and they took with them their what they call the sacred mysteries.
Mm-hmm.
So they directly went to Tibet. So anyway, so this idea of maybe this shift that the entire world is going through is going from the masculine to the feminine. I think we're seeing that right now in this country. I mean, we've got 3 women running for president right now, and the women's movement has been growing exponentially.
Right. Well, look, and then the House had all the women that came in. You know, the wave of women that came in,
and that's only going to increase because the women have suddenly realized that they have 52% of the population,
mm-hmm.
and that means they can go and elect as many women as they want.
In Los Angeles, there's an interesting synchronicity with the condors. I follow a wonderful Instagram page called The Daily James, and he basically has these great ravens, but he's always talking about this condor program in Los Angeles Zoo where they have helped to restore condors. At one point, there was only 22 left, and because of this program, they have over 500. Most of them have been released, and some of them couldn't be released, and the photos are amazing beings. They just look incredible. So I thought, well, that's an interesting coincidence that the condors are coming back, you know, into this area. And there are people that are really trying to help and support them. So I thought that was a nice link to Mu.
Well, again, keep in mind what I said. The condor represents heart energy. Mm-hmm. The eagle represents the intellect. Mm-hmm. So the United States has been functioning on the intellect for the last 150, 175 years, and it's time to start functioning from the heart. Mm-hmm. And that has been my lesson. So I don't know. Well, let me give you a couple other things about myself.
Sure.
You mentioned something about what has this got to do with me, right?
Yes.
Okay. Well, you started this.
I did?
Yes, you did. In 1978, you got interested in numerology. You remember that?
Oh, I do. I remember it. Yes.
And one day you told me that I've got the number 3 all over me. And here's what remember, number 3 represents Mu.
Yes.
Okay. My time of birth is noon. 1 and 2, that's 3. My date of birth comes out to 3. The letters in my first name come out to 3. The letters in my last name come out to 3. All the vowels in my full name come out to 3. All my consonants added together in my full name come out to 3. You told me that, actually.
I don't even remember. I do remember studying numerology, and I remember the book too that I studied. So
I figured out the basic odds. The odds are 5 million to 1 to this happening. Okay. In 1982, I had a brief past life recall of a life in Mu. In 1986, I was going to California when I swore I'd never go to California. And I first was living in Santa Barbara. Then I moved to Los Angeles in 1988, where I had a past life recall of being a Native American in the LA basin. And I later read that the Chumash had peopled those areas long ago. So I have a hunch that I was a Chumash way back when. Mm-hmm. In 2005, I began to study Peruvian Karo shamanism, and I have no idea why. And I attended the first workshop in Utah, and the next 2 in a state park near Santa Barbara. And both of those areas are where migrants from Mu had lived. In 2007, I was drawn to Santa Fe, New Mexico, which reason, as I've mentioned, immigrants from Mu had come in prehistory, leaving their symbols on rocks in New Mexico, whose state represents Mu. The state symbol is a circle with four sets of four lines coming out of it. This is a symbol of Mu.
Wow.
The symbol represents the sun, which is Mu. The four lines represent the four great forces that created the universe, which is one of the symbols that's associated with Mu. Now, this is a fun one. A few months after I moved to Santa Fe, I decided to give interested person the sacred Munaiki rites. And one Sunday, a man called up and said, I don't seem to know where you are. Where are you? And I said, you're right next door to me. And at that, he said, have you looked in your front yard? And I went to the front window and I saw 3 deer grazing in my yard.
Oh, that's so beautiful.
So Pachamama was inviting me, or was telling me that I was welcome. If that's not crazy enough, about 2 days later, I get an email from somebody who shows a picture of 3 bears in Alaska lounging in somebody's front yard.
Universe is really having a joke on you there.
Yes, it is.
Well, Aleister Crowley would say that the more you remember your past lives, the more you really know who you are now and where where your purpose lies.
Well, what Alberto Viola told us, that when I can't remember now exactly what it had to do. I think it had to do with one of the Munaiki rites. He said we would start remembering things which we never knew. And I find this every once in a while is the case. You know, it's not like it's a sudden memory, but I get an impression of something and it seems to fit, you know, and it's very peculiar, but anyway. So I don't know if you have any questions at this point or whatever, but there is more evidence there. There is, for example, I have one section in the book on symbols, which is very interesting, and another one which is really crazy. There's a group of stones that were found near the city of Ica, I-C-A, in Peru, and there are supposedly 11,000 of them. One person has them, and others have another 4,000. And these stones are completely carved over. Each stone is completely carved over.
So I think there's some controversy on those stones, though, as whether they're real or not. And I didn't do enough research, but there's debate about whether they're fake or real or not.
Yeah, well, I know the story on that. But tell me, who in their right mind would go and make 15,000 fakes?
That is a lot. Maybe some of them are fake. That could be possible. Maybe some are real.
Well, if your listeners have a computer, they can get on Google and Google the Ica stones, ICA of Ica, Peru, and you'll see. I'm sorry. Google the images of the Ica stones, and you'll see 4 pictures of Ica stones, and underneath that it says more images. And if you click on that link, you'll see a whole huge page full of these stones. And if you see those, and if you think that they are fakes, I'd be very surprised. They are very intricate. This is not something that some peasant decided he's going to mess around with.
Sure.
They are extremely intricate stones. And the reason that they are called fakes is because they were probably robbed from graves way back when.
So they get in trouble if
when somebody tried to take them out of the country, they were going to prosecute the man who sold it to them because you're not allowed to go and dig them out of your graves. So he said they were fakes.
That's quite possible. So we are about to finish the show up. We thank you so much for being on the show. That was fascinating, and I hope you listeners really enjoyed it and that your mind is now turned on to Mu if you've never heard of it. So thanks again, Dad.
You bet.
And join us next week as we continue to explore the esoteric and the obscure. Thanks so much. See you next week.